I never thought I'd hear those words from my own family. For 53 years, I believed that blood meant something, that despite our differences, my sister Caroline would always see me as her equal. I was wrong. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I stopped by Caroline's house to drop off some recipes she'd asked for. The front door was slightly ajar, and I could hear animated voices coming from the kitchen. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. Aunt Martha just doesn't fit the aesthetic we're going for, my niece Amber was saying, her voice carrying that familiar, entitled tone she'd developed over the years. The wedding photos will be everywhere on social media. Everyone who's anyone in Boston will be there. I froze in the hallway, my hand clutching the recipe cards I'd spent the morning writing out. I know, sweetheart. That was Caroline's voice, my sister, my only living relative besides her children. But she is your aunt, and she's been generous. Mom, be serious. Look at her. The dresses she wears, her hair, that awful makeup, she's just not. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Pretty enough. She'll stick out like a sore thumb next to the bridesmaids. I felt the blood drain from my face, my fingers going numb. I must have misheard. This couldn't be happening. We could just not invite her to the ceremony, Caroline suggested casually, as if discussing what to have for dinner. Maybe just the reception? We could seat her in the back corner with the distant relatives. The photographer won't even notice. Her? That's so mean, Mom, Amber replied, but she was laughing. Though maybe we could tell her it's a small ceremony, or that we ran out of seats. I stood there paralyzed as these two women, my sister and the niece whose college education I had paid for in full, discussed various ways to hide me away, to minimize my presence, to erase me from what should have been a family celebration. She'll be hurt if we don't invite her at all, Caroline sighed. And honestly, we need to be careful. Martha's been hinting about changing her will lately. All that money from Richard. It should stay in the family. The recipe slipped from my hands, fluttering to the floor. The sound was barely audible, but the kitchen fell silent immediately. Hello? Is someone there? Caroline called out. I should have left. I should have walked away with my dignity intact. But something in me, something that had been dormant for too long, sparked to life. I picked up the fallen cards and walked into the kitchen, my head held high despite the earthquake happening inside me. Martha! Caroline's face went white. How long have you been? Long enough, I said quietly. The look of horror on her face would have been satisfying if I wasn't so utterly devastated. I brought those recipes you wanted. I placed them on the counter. Amber wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly fascinated by her manicure. Martha, wait. You didn't hear the whole conversation, Caroline started, but I held up my hand. The aesthetic, the photos, not pretty enough. I looked directly at Amber. Did I miss anything important? The kitchen was silent except for the steady tick of the antique wall clock, a wedding gift I'd given Caroline 30 years ago. It's not personal, Aunt Martha, Amber finally muttered. It's my special day. Everything needs to be perfect. Perfect. That word again. The same word Caroline had used all our lives to exclude me, to remind me that I didn't quite measure up. As children, her clothes were always perfect. Her grades were perfect. Her friends were perfect. And I was just Martha. Plain, practical, dependable Martha. I understand completely, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Your wedding should be exactly as you want it. Caroline looked relieved. Oh, Martha, I'm so glad I won't be attending? What? Don't be ridiculous. Of course you'll be there. No, I said, the word like a stone dropping between us. I won't. I turned and walked out before either of them could see the tears forming. As I drove home, memories flooded back. All the times I'd been pushed aside, made to feel less than, while simultaneously being expected to give and give and give. I'd paid for Amber's college tuition, all 4 years at Dartmouth. I'd helped with the down payment on Caroline's beautiful Victorian home after her divorce. Last year, I'd funded my nephew Tyler's startup without hesitation when he called asking for just a small loan, Auntie M. My late husband Richard had left me incredibly wealthy when he passed 5 years ago. We'd built his technology company. Together, working side by side for 20 years, though few in my family acknowledged my contributions, they saw me as lucky, the plain sister who somehow managed to marry well. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car. too drained to move. Through the windshield, I could see the sprawling colonial house that Richard and I had loved so much. It was too big for just me now. Empty rooms full of memories and silence. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to truly see my family for what they were. Not the loving, supportive unit I'd pretended we were, but people who valued me only for what I could give them. My bank account, my generosity, my unwavering support. But never me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house until dawn, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to buy my family's love. The vacations I'd funded, the holidays I'd hosted, the checks I'd written. Always hoping that this time it would be enough, that this time they would see me. By morning, something had changed inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and throbbing, but alongside it was something new. A clarity I'd never experienced before. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. "Martha, are you absolutely certain about this?" Gerald, my attorney of 20 years, peered at me over his reading glasses. The morning sunlight streamed through his office windows, illuminating the document spread between us. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Gerald sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. "You've always been generous with your family, particularly since Richard passed." "Too generous," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "And for all the wrong reasons." It had been 3 days since I overheard that devastating conversation in Caroline's kitchen. 3 days of excavating painful memories I'd buried so deeply I'd almost convinced myself they didn't exist. "Well, legally speaking, you're well within your rights to make these changes," Gerald said, tapping the estate documents. "The funds you've promised for Amber's wedding, Tyler's business expansion, Caroline's home renovation, none of these were formalized in binding agreements." I nodded, remembering all the casual promises I'd made. "Of course I'll help with the wedding, sweetie. Don't worry about the cost." "Tyler, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. I'd be happy to invest in the next phase." Always giving, always, hoping that this time the gratitude would last longer than the money. "They'll be angry," I said quietly. "Undoubtedly." Gerald didn't sugarcoat it. He'd witnessed firsthand how my family operated. He'd been there for the readings of my parents' will, where Caroline received the family home despite my having been the one who cared for our parents in their final years. He'd watched as I picked up the pieces, never complaining, always the dependable Martha. "Start with the small things," he advised. "The automatic deposits into Tyler's business account, the wedding planner's invoices for Amber. Give yourself time to be certain before making the bigger changes." I left Gerald's office feeling lighter than I had in years. On the drive home, I found myself taking the long route, past the shoreline where Richard and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. We'd talk about everything on those walks: business strategies, books we'd read, dreams for the future. Never once did Richard make me feel that I wasn't enough exactly as I was. "What would you do, Richard?" I whispered, pulling over to watch the waves. In the 5 years since his death, I'd given away nearly $2 million to my family. Not in large, dramatic gestures, but in a steady stream of help that they'd come to expect as their birthright. Caroline's voice echoed in my head. All that money from Richard, it should stay in the family. But I was family too. When had I forgotten that? That evening, I canceled the automatic transfer to Tyler's business account. It was a small act, just $5,000 monthly that he'd requested for operational expenses, but used mostly for expensive client dinners and a leased sports car. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for several seconds before pressing it. I expected to feel guilty. Instead, I felt free. The next morning, my phone rang as I was tending to my garden, the one hobby I'd maintained through everything. "Aunt Martha?" Tyler's voice had that familiar, cajoling tone. "There seems to be some issue with the transfer. My business manager says it didn't come through." I deadheaded a wilting rose, watching the petals fall to the ground. "That's correct. Tyler, I've decided to discontinue those payments." A pause. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke. I've been reconsidering my financial commitments." "But," his voice rose an octave, "but we had an agreement. The whole expansion plan depends on that capital." I remembered how easily he'd pitched me the investment opportunity, never showing me a business plan, never offering equity, just the assumption that Aunt Martha would write the checks. We didn't have an agreement, Tyler. We had a verbal understanding that I would help. And I have, to the tune of $120,000 over the last 2 years. This is about Amber's wedding, isn't it? Mom told me you overheard something and got upset. Look. Look. Amber's just a bridezilla right now. You know how girls get about their special day. There it was, the dismissal, the minimizing. Poor Aunt Martha, so sensitive, so easily hurt. This isn't about the wedding, I said calmly. Though that was illuminating. So what, you're punishing all of us because Amber said something stupid? That's really mature, Aunt Martha. I closed my eyes, absorbing the jab. In the past, this would have worked. I would have apologized, reinstated the money, maybe even increased it to prove I wasn't petty or vindictive. I'm not punishing anyone, Tyler. I'm simply reevaluating how I use my resources. Is this about the startup? Because I can show you the numbers. We're projecting a 300% growth this quarter. It's not about the startup either. I sat on the garden bench, suddenly tired. It's about everything. What's that supposed to mean? How could I explain that I was finally seeing clearly for the first time? That the fog of desperation, to be loved, to be valued, to be included, had finally lifted? It means I'm making some changes in my life, I said finally. Changes, he repeated flatly. And these changes just happen to affect the money you promised me. I didn't promise you anything, Tyler. I offered to help, and I have. Generously. Wow, his voice hardened. Uncle Richard would be really disappointed in you right now. The words were meant to wound, and they did, but not in the way Tyler intended, because he was wrong. Richard had always seen through my family's manipulations. They love what you can do for them, Martha, he'd said more than once. Not who you are. I hadn't wanted to believe him. I have to go, Tyler. I'm expecting a call. I hung up before he could respond. That call came 20 minutes later, from Caroline, predictably. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded, without preamble. Tyler is devastated. He has investors coming next week. Hello to you too, Caroline, I replied, still seated in my garden, watching a hummingbird dart among the flowers Richard had planted for me on our 10th anniversary. Don't play games, Martha. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now stop this nonsense and reinstate Tyler's funding. No, I said simply. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. No, Caroline finally repeated as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. That's right. No. Is this because of what you overheard about the wedding? For God's sake, Martha. Amber was just stressed. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Do we? I asked. Because it sounded like you both meant every word. You're being ridiculous. Of course we want you at the wedding. I thought of Amber's voice. Not pretty enough. She'll stick out like a sore thumb. In Caroline's solution, we could seat her in the back corner with the distant relatives. I won't be attending, I reminded her. Oh, stop it. Of course you will. Your family. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had that silky quality she used when she wanted something. And speaking of the wedding, the planner called. She hasn't received the next installment for the venue. There it was. Not concern for my feelings, not a genuine apology, just the money. I won't be paying for any more wedding expenses, I said, quietly. Another long silence. Then, what did you just say? You heard me, Caroline. I won't be funding Amber's wedding or Tyler's business or your home renovation. Martha, she said slowly, as if talking to a child. I know Richard's death hit you hard. Maybe you're going through some kind of delayed grief reaction. Have you talked to someone? A therapist, maybe? The condescension in her voice made something snap inside me. I'm not grief-stricken, Caroline. I'm awake. I'm awake, I repeated, more to myself than to Caroline. The line had gone so quiet I thought she might have hung up. Martha? Caroline finally said, her voice now dangerously low. You need to think very carefully about what you're doing. I have thought about it. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. You can't just... She sputtered. You can't. Just pull funding like this. Amber's wedding invitations are already sent. The venue deposit is non-refundable. Tyler has meetings scheduled with investors. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility trying to settle back onto my shoulders. For decades, I'd accepted this burden without question. Their problems were my problems. Their emergencies were my emergencies. Their failures were mine to fix. Not anymore, I said softly. What? I said not anymore. These aren't my problems to solve, Caroline. Of course they are. We're family. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized she was crying, or pretending to. Caroline had always been skilled at producing tears when logic failed her. Yes, we are family, but that doesn't make me responsible for funding everyone's lives. This is about the wedding comments, isn't it? I told you Amber was just stressed. We all say things. This isn't about one comment, Caroline. It's about 30 years of comments, 30 years of being tolerated but never valued, 30 years of buying my way into a family that sees me as nothing more than a checkbook. That's not fair, she gasped. We love you, Martha. You're my sister. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, I'm just the family ATM, and I'm closing the account. I ended the call and sat in my garden until the sun began to set, the hummingbirds retreating for the evening. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls. Caroline, Tyler, even Amber, whose message simply read, Aunt Martha, please call me. This is urgent. I silenced my phone and went inside, surprising myself with how calm I felt. The storm would come. There would be more calls, more guilt, more manipulation. But for now, there was just the quiet of my home and the certainty that I was finally doing the right thing. The next morning, I met with Gerald again. This time I brought a notebook filled with detailed entries. What's all this? He asked as I spread the pages across his desk. Documentation. Every dollar I've given to Caroline, Tyler, and Amber over the past 5 years. Loans that were never repaid. Investments that never yielded returns. Gifts that were expected rather than appreciated. Gerald adjusted his glasses and began reviewing the pages. His eyebrows rose higher with each turn. Martha, this is substantial. $2,143,000, I said. The figure burned into my memory. And that doesn't include the property in Vermont that I signed over to Caroline 3 years ago. Or the vintage car collection I let Tyler manage that somehow ended up with 3 cars missing. And you want to recoup these funds? I shook my head. No. What's gone is gone. I just need to make sure the bleeding stops. Gerald nodded thoughtfully. We should revise your will and trust immediately. Based on these notes, your family seems to have specific expectations about their inheritance. They do, I confirmed, remembering Caroline's words. All that money from Richard. It should stay in the family, and you'd like to change those expectations? I'd like to eliminate them entirely. Over the next 2 hours, Gerald and I restructured my estate plan. Richard's technology company, which I still owned a controlling interest in, would be placed in a trust with clear stipulations. The majority of my liquid assets would be transferred to a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs, something Richard and I had always talked about creating. My homes, the Maine residence in Boston and the beach house in Maine, would be handled differently, in a way that brought me more satisfaction than I'd felt in years. Are you sure about this? Gerald asked when we finished, his pen hovering over the final document. Absolutely, I replied. He signed with a flourish, then passed the papers to me. I'll have these formalized by tomorrow. In the meantime, you might want to prepare for some resistance. I'm counting on it, I said, surprising myself with a small smile. That resistance arrived before I even made it home. My phone, which I'd turned back on after leaving Gerald's office, immediately lit up with notifications. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, and most alarmingly, a notification from my home security system that someone was at my door. I pulled into my driveway to find Caroline's Mercedes parked haphazardly near the front steps. She was sitting on my porch, arms crossed, face set in that determined expression I knew too well. Finally, she said as I approached, not bothering to stand. I've been waiting for over an hour. I wasn't aware we had plans, I replied calmly, unlocking the door. She followed me inside without invitation. Plans? No, Martha, we don't have plans. What we have is a crisis you created. I set my purse down on the entryway table and turned to face her. Would you like some tea? I don't want tea, she exploded. I want you to explain why you're suddenly acting like a vindictive child. The wedding venue called this morning. They're canceling because the next payment didn't arrive. As I told you yesterday, I won't be funding Amber's wedding. You promised. No, Caroline, I offered. There's a difference. She paced across my living room, running her hands through her perfectly highlighted hair. This isn't like you, Martha. You've always been so dependable. The word hit me like a slap. Dependable, reliable. the sturdy shoulder everyone leaned on, and then forgot about when the crisis passed. People change, I said simply. Caroline stopped pacing and stared at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. What happened to you? I woke up. Because of one overheard conversation? One thoughtless comment from Amber? That's all it takes to throw away decades of family bonds? I moved to the window, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together. It wasn't one comment, Caroline. It was the final comment. The one that made me see everything clearly. See what clearly? She demanded. That I've been buying my way into this family for years. That without my checkbook, I'm nothing to any of you. That's not true, isn't it? I turned back to her. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me to dinner without asking for something? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without me? Reminding you? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, flustered. We've all been busy, Martha. Life gets complicated. Not too busy for me to babysit Amber's children. Not too complicated to cash my checks. Caroline's expression hardened. So this is punishment. No, I shook my head. This is self-preservation. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done being the family ATM. It means I'm living for myself now. Her eyes narrowed. Living for yourself? What, are you planning to blow all your money on cruises and spa treatments? At your age? The casual cruelty of the comment, at your age, didn't surprise me anymore. This was Caroline, always ready with a subtle dig, a reminder that she was the pretty one, the social one, while I was just. Martha, what I do with my money is no longer your concern. She took a step closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Martha, I know you're upset, but think about what Richard would want. He'd want his money to support his family. I am his family, I said quietly. Me. Not you, not Amber, not Tyler. I was his wife. I helped build that company. And I get to decide what happens to our legacy. Caroline's face flushed with anger. This isn't over. You can't just cut us off without consequences. I'm counting on it, I replied, echoing my words to Gerald earlier. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans this afternoon. Plans? What plans could you possibly have that are more important than fixing this mess? I walked to the door and held it open. Goodbye, Caroline. She paused in the doorway, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. You'll regret this, Martha. When you're old and alone, you'll wish you hadn't pushed away the only family you have. The words were designed to wound, to awaken that deep fear of abandonment that had driven so many of my decisions. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm certainty. I'm already alone, Caroline. I've been alone for years. The only difference now is that I know it. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, listening to her heels click angrily down the path, the car door slam, the engine rev too high as she pulled away. I should have felt guilty, anxious, maybe even frightened by her parting threat. Instead, I felt something unexpected. I felt free. The day after Caroline stormed out of my house, I woke up with a strange sensation in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it. Lightness. For the first time in decades, I felt unburdened, as if I'd shed a heavy coat I'd been wearing for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it out to the garden, watching the morning light filter through the trees. Richard had loved these quiet moments. The day offers itself to you, he used to say. It's up to you what you make of it. What had I made of my days since he passed? Endless cycles of appeasing my family, writing checks, absorbing their casual cruelty, and then convincing myself it was normal. That it was what families did. My phone pinged with a text from Gerald. Documents ready for your signature. Available this afternoon? I replied affirmatively and set the phone aside. Today was for me. After finishing my tea, I walked to the spare bedroom that I'd always intended to turn into an art studio. Boxes of supplies sat untouched in the corner, easels, canvases, paints that Richard had given me for my 50th birthday, 3 years before his death. You used to paint all the time when we first met, he'd said, presenting me with the professionally curated collection. I want to see what you'll create next. But there had always been a reason to delay. Caroline needed help planning Christmas. Tyler's business was in crisis. Amber's children needed watching. And slowly the dust had gathered on the unopened boxes, much like my own creative spirit had been buried under years of obligations. I opened the first box, running my fingers over the expensive brushes, still in their original packaging. Then another box, and another, until the room was filled with possibilities. By noon, I had set up an easel by the window and prepared a canvas. I stood there for a long moment, brush in hand, suddenly paralyzed. What if I couldn't do it anymore? What if that part of me was gone forever? Just start, I whispered to myself, hearing Richard's encouraging voice in my head. The rest will follow. I touched brush to canvas, making a simple blue stroke. Then another, and another. I lost track of time as colors blended and shapes emerged. Not a specific image, but an expression of everything I'd been holding inside. By the time my phone alarm reminded me of my appointment with Gerald, I had created something raw and imperfect and entirely mine. I cleaned my brushes carefully, changed my paint-spattered clothes, and drove to Gerald's office with a renewed sense of purpose. "You look different," Gerald remarked as I signed the final documents formalizing my new estate plan. "I feel different," I admitted. "Your family has been calling the office," he said carefully. I didn't take the calls, but my assistant said they sounded agitated. I nodded, unsurprised. They're used to getting their way. Are you prepared for what might come next? They could make things difficult. I thought of Caroline's parting words. "You'll regret this, Martha. When you're old and alone, you'll wish you hadn't pushed away the only family you have." "They already have made things difficult," I said. "For years. I'm just finally done accepting it." Gerald handed me a folder with copies of all the signed documents. "The Martha Wellington Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs," he read from the top page. Richard would have been proud. I felt tears prick my eyes at the mention of my husband's name, coupled with approval. How long had it been since someone had told me they were proud of me? Had anyone ever? "There's something else I'd like to do," I said, pulling a notepad from my purse. "Something personal." Gerald listened intently as I outlined my idea, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding. "It's unorthodox," he said when I finished, "but not impossible. Let me make some calls." I left his office feeling strangely energized. The Martha who had walked in there a week ago, timid, accommodating, desperate for approval, was fading away, replaced by someone stronger, someone with boundaries, someone who valued herself. At home, I continued my transformation. I emptied my closet of clothes I'd bought to blend in, to be invisible, sensible beige sweaters and navy slacks that Caroline had once described as appropriate for someone your age. In their place, I ordered items I'd always admired but never dared to wear. A red wrap dress, a buttery soft leather jacket, boots with a subtle heel. I made an appointment with a salon that Richard had always encouraged me to try. "Treat yourself," he'd say. "You deserve beautiful things." I'd always put it off, redirecting the money to another of Tyler's ventures or Amber's crises. Not anymore. 2 days later, I sat in Philippe's chair as he studied my reflection in the mirror. "What are we doing today?" he asked. For a moment, old habits surfaced. The urge to ask for something minimal, unobtrusive, a trim, nothing dramatic. But the new Martha spoke instead. "Something different," I said firmly. "Something that feels like me." Felipe smiled, understanding immediately. "And who is the real Martha?" It was a profound question, disguised as a styling consultation. I considered it carefully. "Someone who's been hidden away for too long," I finally answered. "Someone who's ready to be seen." 3 hours later, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Gone was the shapeless, shoulder-length gray hair I'd worn for decades. In its place was a stylish, chin-length cut with subtle layers that framed my face beautifully. Philippe had suggested subtle highlights that brought warmth to my complexion. "Beautiful," he declared, and for the first time in years, I believed it might be true. On the drive home, I caught glimpses of myself in the rearview mirror and felt a strange mixture of unfamiliarity and rightness. This was me. Or rather, this was who I was becoming. Not because I wanted to impress anyone or meet some external standard of beauty, but because I was finally making choices for myself. My phone rang through the car's speaker system. Amber's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then accepted. The call. "Aunt Martha?" Her voice was honey-sweet, the same tone she used when asking for money for a new car or help with her mortgage. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Hello, Amber, I replied evenly. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding about the wedding. She paused, waiting for me to ask what she meant. When I remained silent, she continued, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. Mom told me you're upset about something. You overheard? About the seating arrangements? It wasn't about seating arrangements, Amber. You said I wasn't pretty enough to be at your wedding, that I wouldn't fit the aesthetic. What? No, that's not, she sputtered. I would never say. Something like that. I heard you, Amber. I heard you, Amber. I was standing right there in the hallway. Another pause. Okay, maybe I said something insensitive. Wedding planning is so stressful, Aunt Martha, you can't imagine the pressure. Every little detail has to be perfect. There was that word again. Perfect. The standard against which I had always been measured and found wanting. I understand, I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Your wedding should be exactly as you want it. So you'll help with the venue payment? Relief flooded her voice. It's due by Friday, and without it, we'll lose the deposit and… No, Amber, I won't be paying for your wedding. The line went silent except for her sharp intake of breath. But you promised, I offered. I corrected her gently. And now, I'm withdrawing that offer. Is this some kind of punishment? Her voice rose. Because I said one thoughtless thing? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car, watching a pair of cardinals flutter around the bird feeder Richard had installed years ago. It's not punishment, Amber, it's a boundary. A boundary? She practically spat the word. This is ridiculous. You can't just change your mind about something this important. Actually, I can. And I have. What am I supposed to tell Bradley's parents? They're expecting the Chatham House reception. Everyone's already received the invitations. That's for you to figure out. You're an adult, Amber. Adults solve their own problems. I can't believe you're doing this to me. Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine distress. After everything we've been through as a family, I thought you loved me. The words were calculated to wound, to activate the guilt that had driven me for so long. But something had shifted inside me. I could recognize the manipulation now, see it for what it was. I do love you, Amber, I said softly. But love shouldn't come with a price tag. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done buying my place in this family. Fine, she snapped. Keep your money, but don't expect to be welcome in our lives anymore. You've ruined everything. The call ended abruptly. I sat for a moment, waiting for the familiar wave of shame and anxiety that usually followed these confrontations. It didn't come. Instead, I felt a surprising sense of peace. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror again. The new haircut, the clearer eyes, the lifted shoulders no longer weighted down by others' expectations. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I smiled at my own reflection. This wasn't just a physical transformation. Something fundamental had changed inside me, a shift in how I valued myself, in what I was willing to accept, in who I allowed to define my worth. I stepped out of the car and walked toward my house, noticing how the late afternoon light gilded the edges of the garden beds. There was beauty everywhere, I realized. I'd just been too busy looking for approval to see it. Inside, I returned to my newly established art studio and stood before the canvas I'd started earlier. With fresh eyes, I could see what I'd been trying to express. Not just pain or anger, but emergence. A butterfly breaking free of its chrysalis. A woman reclaiming herself. I picked up a brush and began to paint again. For 3 weeks, my phone remained blissfully quiet. No desperate calls from Caroline. No guilt-inducing texts from Amber. No financial emergencies from Tyler. I'd expected more persistence, more attempts to wear down my resolve. But after that final confrontation with Amber, there was only silence. I might have worried before, but the new Martha recognized it for what it was, the calm before the storm. They were regrouping, strategizing. They weren't done with me yet. Use the respite wisely. Each morning, I painted in my studio. I enrolled in a watercolor class, making my first new friend in years, a retired surgeon named Diana, who had also recently freed herself from a suffocating family. They'll never stop trying to pull you back in, she warned over coffee. The moment you stop being useful is when they'll try hardest to regain control. I'm counting on it, I replied, surprising myself with my confidence. The storm broke on, a Wednesday. I was gardening when a Blacktown car pulled into my driveway. Tyler emerged wearing his business meeting suit, the one I'd paid for 2 years ago. "Aunt Martha," he called with forced cheerfulness. "You've been impossible to reach." That was intentional. His smile faltered briefly. "I like what you've done with your hair. Very youthful." I didn't acknowledge the backhanded compliment. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here on behalf of the family," he began solemnly. "We're worried about you." "Are you?" "Of course. These sudden changes, cutting everyone off financially, the dramatic makeover, it's not like you." "Actually, this is exactly like me. The real me. You just never bothered to know her." He sighed dramatically. "Look, I'm not here to argue. Amber's wedding is Saturday and we all agree you should be there. Even Amber? Especially Amber, she's heartbroken about your misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding. I heard exactly what she said." He dismissed this with a wave. "Water under the bridge. She wants you there. We all do. Your family." I studied his face, finding no sincerity. "And the venue? Has she downsized to something she can afford without my contribution?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "Mom took out a loan against her house to cover it." This surprised me. Caroline had never sacrificed for her children. That had always been my role. So if the expenses are covered, why the sudden desire for my presence? I thought I didn't fit the aesthetic. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "The thing is, some guests have been asking about you. Uncle Richard's business partners specifically. They were surprised you weren't more involved, given how close you were to Amber." There it was, the real reason. Not because they missed me, but because they were concerned about appearances. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. He frowned, clearly expecting an immediate yes. "What's there to think about? It's your niece's wedding. And as you pointed out, I haven't been involved in the planning. I wouldn't want to intrude on Amber's vision." After he left, I called Gerald. "It's time. They've made contact. Are you still certain about this plan?" "More certain than ever." The next 3 days passed in a blur of quiet preparation. Diana helped me select an outfit, an elegant sapphire blue dress that made me feel confident rather than invisible. I packed a small suitcase and stored it in my car. I finalized arrangements that had been months in the making, ever since Richard's death had planted the first seed of this idea. On Saturday, I arrived at Chatham House precisely at 3. The historic mansion was decorated lavishly with white roses and crystal accents, exactly the elegant aesthetic Amber had been so concerned about preserving. Caroline spotted me immediately, her eyes widening at my transformation. "Martha, you came!" She embraced me with performative affection. "And you look different." "Thank you. Amber will be so relieved. She was afraid you were still upset about that silly misunderstanding." She steered me toward a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit. "Patricia, this is Martha, my sister, the one I told you about." Patricia extended a manicured hand. "At last. Caroline speaks so highly of you. She says you've been instrumental in making this day possible." "Does she?" I glanced at Caroline, whose smile had frozen. "Absolutely. The venue, the catering, apparently, you have exquisite taste." Before I could respond, Caroline interjected, "Martha is always so generous. Family means everything to her." The irony was perfect. Even now, she was taking credit for my supposed contributions, crafting a narrative of familial harmony. Amber appeared then, resplendent in her designer gown, her eyes locked with mine, genuine shock crossing her face before she composed herself. "Aunt Martha, you made it, and you look, wow, so different." "You look beautiful, Amber," I said sincerely. She beamed, clearly expecting me to compliment her, but not expecting one herself. "Thank you. I was so worried you might still be upset about that silly thing I said. I didn't mean it, of course." "We're about to take family photos," Caroline interjected. "Martha, why don't you wait in the sitting room? We'll call you when we need you." Some things never changed. Even now they were trying to minimize my presence. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse, "I have something for the bride before the ceremony." Amber's eyes lit up with familiar greed. "A gift? You shouldn't have." I handed her a small envelope. Just a token. She tore it open eagerly, clearly expecting a check. Instead, she found a simple card with a handwritten message. "True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how you treat the people who love you. May you discover what really matters." Her smile faltered. Oh, it's nice. She glanced at Caroline, confusion evident. But there's nothing else? Nothing else. Caroline stepped in smoothly. How thoughtful. Now we really should get those photos started. Martha, perhaps you could help direct guests to their seats? I nodded, accepting the dismissal. Of course, I'll see you at the ceremony. But they wouldn't. Because while they posed for their perfect photos, preserving the illusion of the perfect family, I quietly slipped away, out a side door, into my waiting car, and onto the road that would take me to my new life. In my purse was a sealed letter, addressed to Gerald, with instructions to deliver it to my family after the wedding. It contained the final piece of my silent plan. The news that Martha Wellington, as they knew her, had disappeared. Not just from the wedding, but from their lives forever. Lives forever. Chapter 6. A New Beginning. The coastal highway stretched before me, the Atlantic glittering alongside. I'd been driving for hours, Boston shrinking with each mile. My phone buzzed from the glove compartment. Caroline discovering my absence? No doubt, but I left it untouched. This journey began before today, perhaps when I overheard that conversation in Caroline's kitchen, or earlier, when Richard whispered from his hospital bed, "Live for yourself now, Martha. You've earned it." The sun was setting as I pulled into the driveway of my small cottage. Located in a quiet Maine town, it was nothing like my Boston home, just a simple 2-bedroom with weathered shingles and a porch facing the sea. But it was mine, bought under a trust name that couldn't be traced to Martha Wellington. I breathed in the salt air, tension sliding from my shoulders. Through the window, I saw the welcome basket Diana had arranged, the only person from my old life who knew my destination. By now, Gerald would be delivering my letter to the family. I could imagine their reactions, Caroline's indignation, Tyler's calculation of financial implications, Amber's disbelief that her wedding had been ruined. The letter explained everything and nothing. They would learn I had sold the Boston Saburais house, liquidated most assets, and disappeared. That the Martha Wellington Foundation had been established with most of my fortune. That modest trust funds awaited Amber's children when they turned 30, contingent on education and employment. What it didn't reveal was where I'd gone, or my new identity. Martha Wellington had vanished, replaced by Mary Winters, widow and artist seeking a quiet place to begin again. I checked my phone one last time. 27 missed calls, 42 messages, 3 voicemails. The first, Caroline, furious. "Martha, where are you? You're embarrassing us. Call immediately." The second, Tyler, condescending. "Aunt Martha, this disappearing act isn't funny. Mom's freaking out, Amber's crying. Whatever point you're making, you've made it." The third, surprised. Me, James Holloway, Richard's oldest friend. "Martha, I understand completely. Richard would be proud. If you ever need anything, I'm here. No questions asked. Be happy, my friend. You deserve it." Tears welled, not from sadness, but from being truly seen by someone who had known both Richard and me. James had always treated me as Richard's equal, never as the invisible wife my family perceived. I deleted the messages and turned off the phone. Tomorrow I'd get a new number, completing my transition. But tonight belonged to Martha, to honoring who I had been and all I had endured. Morning brought a new day and literally a new life. I walked the beach as the sun rose. The town was stirring. Fishermen heading out, shopkeepers setting up, joggers enjoying the cool air. I stopped at a small art supply store. A bell jingled as I entered. "Good morning," called a gray-haired woman. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for canvas, brushes, maybe some acrylics," I replied. "I'm just getting back into painting." She smiled warmly. "Welcome back to it. I'm Helen." "Mary," I said, the name still new. "Mary Winters, I just moved here." "Well, Mary, we have an artist group that meets Thursdays. You should join us. I'd like that," I replied, meaning it. The morning unfolded like a gift, selecting supplies, being invited into a community, returning to my cottage with anticipation rather than dread. This was freedom, not the absence of connections, but authentic ones. That afternoon, I set up my easel on the porch. The blank canvas no longer intimidated me. Here, there were no expectations, no judgments, just me, the sea, and possibilities. Painted until the light faded, losing myself in creation. The result was imperfect but honest, a seascape capturing not just the view but the emotional landscape of my new beginning. 6 months later, life as Mary Winters had found its rhythm. I painted daily, sometimes on the porch, sometimes on the beach, occasionally in a small rented studio in town. I'd joined Helen's art group, finding friendship among creators who knew nothing of my past. My work had begun to sell, modestly at first, then with increasing success. Not enough to live on, but the income complemented the trust I'd established before disappearing. On an autumn morning, as I set up my easel, a familiar voice called my new name. Mary, I thought I'd find you here. Diana walked toward me, her smile warm as the day we'd met in that watercolor class. You made it, I said, embracing her. I wouldn't miss it, she replied. Martha, Mary, you look radiant. I smiled, knowing it was true. The haunted woman who had discovered her family's betrayal was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, at peace. Any news? I asked as we walked along the shore. Caroline tried, contesting the foundation, claiming you weren't of sound mind. The judge dismissed it. Tyler's business collapsed. Amber got a job. I felt a brief pang, not of regret, but of recognition for the family I'd once tried so hard to please. Do they know where I went? No, they've hired investigators, but Gerald keeps them running in circles. She studied me. Do you ever miss it? I considered, watching waves meet shore. I miss Richard. I miss the life we might have had. But the manipulation, the constant feeling I wasn't enough? No. So what's next for Mary Winters? I thought of my small gallery space, my watercolor classes, the quiet joy in this authentic life. Everything, I said. Everything I've always wanted but never dared. We walked back toward my cottage, the sea breeze carrying away the last whispers of Martha. Wellington, leaving only Mary Winters, finally completely free.